Hello folks, Mr. Shy here. You will be able to enjoy brand new content very shortly. However, before the video begins, I just wanted to try and encourage you, if you would, be so kind as to go and check out my brand new website that I've just finished constructing. It's www.thatmrshy.com. There's also a link in the description if you are the forgetful type or the type that doesn't like typing into your browser, I guess. Thanks folks. Folks, we need to have an updated chat about freehand. It's one of my favourite things to do in the hobby. I have a background in 2D painting. I used to do customised little Magic the Gathering cards for people and had a really good time doing it, was very successful doing it. It was a lot of fun until it wasn't. And I kind of fell out with 2D painting, which is why I sort of don't freehand maybe as often as I should these days. But I do think it's an important part of the hobby. I think it's an important part of miniature painting that is worth at least learning the basics of. And so that's what I wanted to bring you here for today, to go over some of the fundamentals of freehand. Okay, so for this particular example, I'm going to keep things fairly easy. We're starting with a Demos Pattern Rhino here, which is a Forge World upgrade kit for the plastic Rhino sprue. I've got everything super glued together, plastic glued together, except for the top hatch, which is where I want to show the main piece of freehand. I've got that just tacked in with some blue tack. And that's because I want to be able to take it off to do the freehand on in a bit, but before we do that we need to establish some overall lighting. So I'm going to use the airbrush here. You don't have to use the airbrush here, but it's at least important to know here that you want to be mapping in your basics before you start your freehand, so having the piece in situ while you do that is really helpful. Okay, so with that done, I now want to get this as flat as possible. So I'm going to create a little cardboard platform with some doubled over tape on it, and I'm going to use that to mount the doors to, so that I've got them positioned how they go together, but in as flat a way as possible to make them as easy to paint as possible. And obviously having pieces relatively flat like this and being able to flatten them down onto a piece of cardboard is as near as we get in freehanding to a perfect scenario. But this is certainly where I would recommend you start as well, so that's what I'm going to show you. Even if you have got curved pieces and stuff like that, I would still recommend trying to get them as flat as possible with as little underneath them as you can, because it's just going to make life a hell of a lot easier for getting that freehand to look nice and crisp and clean. And it's probably going to surprise 0.0 people that I'm starting out here with a sketch. You might be tempted though to put that sketch on with a pencil. I'm going to recommend you don't. Surprisingly, I actually recommend you use a paintbrush to do your sketch. The point is going to be finer than your pencil anyway, and the real bonus is that you mitigate that risk of accidentally scratching off any of the paint that you've already laid down. This is especially important if you've airbrushed your previous layers on, because they're going to be so thin, it's going to be really easy to lift them with a pencil. Another thing that can seem a bit counterintuitive to some people is that you want to put your sketch down in the darkest colour you possibly can. If you think that you can cover over black no problem and that you'll be able to see black, then that's the ideal colour for your sketch. The reason is simply that it's going to be inconspicuous when you're done, because anywhere that you don't fill in at the end, you can kind of just turn it into black line. And again, once you're happy with your sketch and you start your colour infill, you want to start with very dark tones, much darker than you intend on the finished colour being. And that's because without things like shades and instant washes to rely on, we're actually leaning on these really dark origins to build up our depth as we start to add lighter and lighter colours. And remember, if you find yourself making little errors on the edges, you can use a black line to cover them up. It's honestly going to be way easier than trying to colour match and fill out into your background layer. And so when you first start out in freehand, don't be afraid to use a black line. This doesn't necessarily mean it's something you have to stick with. As you get more advanced, you may find that you want to steer away from that and go for more realistic renders or traditional painting styles that don't involve a black line. But for starting out with, I'd lean on it, because it's just going to make it less stress. An important mindset thing, as you get into the higher end of your highlights, you need to remember that you're also trying to help this appear 3D, or at least that you might be. Not necessarily, some stuff you certainly want to look flat. But if you are, then you need to be thinking about creating this sense of raised edges using your highlights, and not just a light to dark like you would on a plane. And if during your workup you randomly spot an opportunity to just do something cool that wasn't part of the plan, don't worry about it, go for it. The sketch is there as a guideline, it's there to keep your initial idea recorded whilst you work on it. You really don't have to worry about deviating from it, and experimentation often produces some of our best work. When you start to get into the finest of your highlights, be prepared to need to ride the very, very tip of your brush. This is a lot of where the difficulty in freehanding comes from, in controlling the very end of your brush, because it's something that we don't have to do very often in normal miniature painting. My recommendation for helping with this is to concentrate on getting the heel of your palm as flat to a surface as possible. And I find that that tends to mitigate most of my tip shaking, which allows me to keep good control. This is why I recommend trying to flatten the piece down onto something like a piece of cardboard, mount it as flatly as possible, so that you can get the heel of your palm onto your work table. And once I'm happy with the brightness of my highlights, the next thing I like to do is just check that my shadows are dark enough as well. If they're not, which will quite often be the case when you've had to work up through so many highlights, I like to use some nice dark glazes to run into them, just to create a sort of gradient that leads into those shadows instead of a stark, sudden transition. Now the next task is to integrate our freehand into the greater design itself. So I need to get the doors glued on and a quick spray of accelerator so that I can start planning what's next. And the easiest way I've found to facilitate this integration is to bring the free-handed component into the rest of the sculpt at the time that I'm about to start doing the higher end of my highlights, any texturing, battle damage, wear and tear, that kind of stuff, because those are all things that are really effective at tying the two separate pieces together, making them look like one unified element. And if you happen to have any other kind of striking visual elements, like say the lightning on these Night Lords, you can also use that to help integrate things further, creating another layer over the top to push your free-handed layer back down into the mix and make it look like it belongs to more part of the greater thing. And as you can see, by following these directions, we end up with a really nice little free-handed piece that works as a whole visual item. Everything looks integrated together, makes sense, nothing looks like it's just stuck on. And I think this is a really successful attempt and a good demonstration of how you can get started freehanding beyond just, you know, tactical markings and letters and numbers and that kind of thing. It's an interesting project to try at home, so give it a go and let me know what you think. And that really is it. That's my freehand fundamentals, the basics for getting into freehand. I do think that you can go expansively further into this. There is so much about freehanding that you can study if you should so wish to, because it is essentially applying traditional art in a very tiny scale to a 3D miniature. But that said, I do think that it would take a very, very long time to cover that in a video, so Fundamentals seems like a good place to start and let you go off on your own adventure if you want to start freehanding from there. So as I said before, give it a go and let me know in the comments if you find these techniques helpful. I'd love to have an opportunity to chat to you about it, because freehand is a really cool part of the miniature hobby. And that's it from me, folks. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, enable notifications, and if you really want to be super helpful, check out my links in the description to things like affiliate programs and my Patreon and my brand new website, including my store. But for now, folks, it is time for me to get out of here, so thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye for now, folks.